I want you to picture a box of crayons.
Oh, okay. Like a brand new box.
Yeah, exactly. Think about that very specific, instantly recognizable smell of the wax when you pop the lid open.
Right. It's such a distinct childhood memory.
It really is. And think about the feeling of cracking open a brand new coloring book. You know, the kind with those crisp, thick black outlines printed on that slightly cheap, textured paper.
Oh, yeah, the paper that kind of grabs the crayon wax.
Yes. It is probably the most, universally nostalgic, innocent activity we have. You just picture a kid sitting at a kitchen table, tongue sticking out just a little bit in absolute concentration.
Trying so desperately to keep the cerulean blue inside the lines of, like, a cartoon dinosaur or a smiling sun.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
because it's tactile, it's safe, and it's incredibly simple.
Yeah, it's one of our earliest introductions to having creative control over something.
It is. But I want you to imagine what happens when you take that universally innocent medium, the coloring book, and you completely swap out the content.
Okay, I see where we're going with this.
You fill those bold black outlines not with fairy tales or farm animals, but with incredibly heavy, polarizing, and complex political and theological ideologies.
Wow. That is quite the pivot.
Right. What happens to your brain when the caption under the picture you're coloring isn't "see the dog run," but is instead a combative manifesto about the role of the federal government?
Or the nature of divine authority.
Exactly. A literal ongoing culture war right there on the page.
I mean, that creates a massive amount of cognitive friction.
Yes, cognitive friction. That is the perfect way to put it.
Because you have the absolute innocence of the childhood medium colliding head-on with the sheer gravity of adult, geopolitical and theological messaging.
And that specific collision, that friction, is exactly what we are unpacking today. If you are listening to this, our mission on this deep dive is to explore how political and cultural movements memorialize their leaders.
And how they build resilience after a tragedy.
Right. And most importantly, how they mobilize the youth. So to do this, we are looking at a very specific, fascinating artifact.
It really is an incredible piece of media.
It is. Our primary source material today is a newly published coloring book titled Faith and Freedom, and it's authored by Dr. Antonio Arnold.
And we have excerpts, we have the illustrations, and we have the underlying text to go through.
We do. Now, before we go any further, I need to look you, the listener, in the eye, metaphorically speaking, of course, and offer a crucial impartiality disclaimer.
Yes, this is very important.
The source material we are examining today contains highly charged political and social viewpoints spanning both the conservative and progressive spectrums.
Very highly charged.
Right. So we are completely neutral guides today. We are not taking sides, we are not endorsing the views in this book, and we are not condemning them either.
We are just the messengers.
Exactly. Our mission is simply to put this cultural artifact under the microscope so you can understand the underlying mechanics of how a galvanized political movement actually functions.
We are essentially taking an anthropological approach to this.
I like that, an anthropological approach.
Yeah, we're looking at this interactive book the same way a historian might analyze a political pamphlet from the American Revolution.
Right, right.
We are asking, what is the underlying architecture of these beliefs? How is the author trying to transmit them? And why did they choose this highly unusual method to do it?
I love that framing so much. So let's jump right into the architecture. Because before we look at the specific beliefs outlined in these pages, we really have to look at the messenger.
The author himself.
Right. Dr. Antonio Arnold. He presents a very specific profile in the text. He is a devoted Christian conservative, a theologian, an author, a preacher, and a veteran of the United States Armed Forces.
That specific intersection of identities, veteran and pastor, is absolutely vital to understanding how this text operates.
How so?
Well, it is a hallmark of the modern Christian conservative movement. He is establishing authority on two completely different but complementary battlefronts.
Oh, I see. It's like the sword and the shield.
Exactly. When someone steps up and says, "I am a veteran," they are carrying the weight of physical sacrifice.
Right. They're saying, I have put my body on the line to defend the physical borders and the constitutional ideals of this nation.
Yes, it grants them immediate earthly credibility on the subject of freedom.
And then the moment he adds pastor and theologian to that resume, the authority shifts from the earthly realm to the divine.
Precisely. He isn't just defending the physical nation anymore. He is stepping up to defend its spiritual soul.
Wow. That is a heavy combination.
It is. His ministry is rooted in seeing America return to what he views as its biblical foundations. He is blending patriotism with pastoral care,
So he's positioning himself as both a warrior for the state and a shepherd for the soul.
which gives this coloring book an incredibly heavy mantle of authority before you even crack the spine.
Absolutely. And his motivation for creating it is just as intense. He notes in the introduction that he felt moved by the Holy Spirit to share this message.
And he specifically mentions choosing courage over comfort.
Yeah, he even acknowledges that he knew family and friends might strongly disagree with him speaking out so boldly, but he chose to publish it anyway.
Framing it as courage over comfort is a brilliant rhetorical move, honestly,
Why does that specific phrase work so well?
because it immediately casts the act of publishing the book, and by extension, the act of you, the reader, buying and engaging with it, as an act of bravery.
Oh, I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, it transforms coloring from a passive hobby into participation in a movement that requires standing firm against cultural opposition.
Let's talk about that engagement, because the medium itself is what completely hooked me. I'm looking at the cover of the book right now.
This is a very striking cover.
It really is. It has faith and freedom in giant block letters. Behind the text is this massive, dramatic American flag.
And in the foreground, you have a very diverse group of young people.
Yeah, one is hoisting a large cross. Others are holding up protest-style signs that say Jesus and freedom and faith.
Some have their fists raised. That looks like a rally frozen in time.
It totally does. Now, looking at this, my immediate thought was that this is a Trojan horse.
Let me guess. You're thinking it takes incredibly combative adult themes and sneaks them past our defenses by dressing them up as child's play.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. You are taking the mechanics of the state, constitutional rights, and biblical literalism and rendering them into simple, digestible line art.
It is a fascinating juxtaposition.
It made me wonder, is this actually meant for a 6-year-old to color in, or is it an interactive manifesto designed for teenagers, or even like a therapeutic exercise for older adults in the movement?
I would argue it functions as all three, and that is where the psychology of learning comes into play.
Oh, break that down for me.
Well, if you think about it from a purely pedagogical standpoint, choosing a coloring book to transmit complex ideology is genuinely brilliant.
Help me understand the psychology there, because to me it just seems like it might simplify the politics too much, like it loses all the nuance.
It does simplify the visual, absolutely. But you have to think about the cognitive process of coloring itself.
Okay, I'm with you.
Think about how we usually consume political messaging today. You scroll past a tweet, you watch a 60-second video on your phone.
Right, it's so fast.
The engagement is entirely passive, fleeting, and usually defensive. Your brain's cynical filters are up.
Right, the endless doom scroll. You're just waiting to get angry at the next post.
Precisely. But coloring is kinetic, tactile learning. It requires focus, fine motor skills, and, most importantly, time.
Time. Yeah, you can't rush coloring if you want it to look good.
If a teenager sits down to color that cover page, they have to stare at the words faith, freedom, and Jesus for 20, maybe 30 minutes.
They have to decide what color the protest signs should be. They have to carefully shade around the cross.
Yes, they aren't just reading the message, they are physically participating in creating it.
Tactile learning forces the brain to slow down. That makes so much sense.
It bypasses the quick twitch, argumentative part of our brain, the amygdala, and fosters deeper cognitive retention. The abstract concept becomes a physical experience.
And Dr. Arnold actually explicitly states this in his introduction, doesn't he?
He does. He says he wants each page to be a spark of creativity, of truth, and of transformation.
He literally instructs the reader to color not just with ink, but with intention.
Color not just with ink, but with intention. That is wild.
It completely reframes the entire activity. It turns coloring into a meditative, almost prayerful exercise.
You are meditating on the absolute principles of the movement while your hand moves the crayon.
But this begs a massive question. Why did Dr. Arnold feel so urgently moved to create this meditative tool right now? Books like this don't just appear in a vacuum.
No, they certainly don't.
And that brings us to the explosive catalyst behind all of this. We have to talk about September 10th and the aftermath.
Because the sudden creation of this artifact was a direct response to a massive shock to the American political ecosystem.
It was an earthquake for this specific demographic. We are talking about the tragic passing of Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA.
Right. The factual timeline we have shows that Charlie Kirk suffered a tragic death on September 10th.
And he was right in the middle of an event at Utah Valley University when it happened.
The sudden public death of a highly visible, highly polarizing political leader, especially while they are actively on the ground organizing, is an incredibly rare and volatile sociological event.
I can imagine. It creates a vacuum, doesn't it?
It creates a vacuum, but it also creates an immense, immediate surge of energy.
And the numbers we have on that surge are difficult to even wrap your head around.
They really are staggering.
In the immediate aftermath of his death, Turning Point USA received over 37,000 inquiries from people wanting to start new chapters in their local high schools and colleges.
37,000.
I really want to pause and just think about the sheer logistics of that number.
It's hard to fathom.
Imagine being an operations director or a regional manager at that organization on September 12th. You walk into the office and you suddenly have tens of thousands of teenagers and college students who last week were maybe just casually watching videos online, now urgently demanding the infrastructure to mobilize.
It is a logistical tsunami.
A tsunami is the perfect word.
It's a tsunami driven by a very specific psychological shift.
Huh.
What we are witnessing in those 37,000 inquiries is the real-time sociology of martyrdom.
Okay, let's unpack that.
And I want to clarify, I am using martyrdom purely in the sociological and historical sense here, not as a religious judgment.
Right, understood. Explain how that shift happens. What changes in the mind of the follower when the leader dies in this way?
Think about any living, highly visible political organizer. When they are alive, they are inherently flawed. They are human.
Right, they make mistakes.
They might give a bad interview, they might lose their temper in a debate, their policies might contradict themselves. They are a living, messy, controversial entity.
But the moment they die,
Especially a sudden, tragic death while they are literally on a campus fighting for their cause. Their persona is instantly frozen and flattened.
I like that word.
They transition from being a living debater to being an unassailable symbol.
And you can't argue with the symbol.
Exactly. You cannot debate a memory. The human flaws are washed away in the collective grief, and what is left behind is a distilled, pure, idealized version of their ideology.
Which is exactly what we see in the coloring book.
Oh, absolutely.
The illustrations of Kirk on these pages are resolute. He's smiling warmly or looking determinedly off into the distance.
The black and white line art literally renders him as a symbol on the page. All the nuance is gone, leaving only the heroic ideal.
And that transformation is what supercharges recruitment.
Yes. When a polarizing leader dies, their followers suddenly feel an overwhelming sense of urgency.
Like they have to pick up the slack.
The leader's mission is perceived as violently interrupted and unfinished. Those 37,000 students didn't just suddenly agree with his politics.
They felt a profound, sudden moral obligation to ensure his death wasn't the end of the story.
They are picking up the mantle. Dr. Arnold states exactly this in the book, writing that through the life and legacy of Charlie Kirk, this book encourages you to raise your voice with courage and conviction.
So the tragedy is quite literally repurposed into rocket fuel for the movement.
It is.
But here is the part of the source material that genuinely broke my brain. I understand the American teenagers mobilizing. He was a campus organizer. His organization is called Turning Point USA.
Emphasizing the USA part.
Right. But the reaction to his death on September 10th did not stop at the U.S. borders. It created a geopolitical shockwave.
The international reverberations are arguably the most fascinating aspect of this entire timeline.
Let's look at Europe. Immediately following the news of his death, the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, releases an official statement calling his passing a deep wound for democracy.
And France and the UK express official sorrow over the loss of a free speech champion.
And then it gets even more intense. Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, and France's Jordan Bardella publicly used the event to point fingers at the progressive left, blaming them for fostering a global climate of intolerance.
And the diplomatic drama escalated all the way to the halls of the European Union.
Oh, right, the EU Parliament stuff.
Conservative lawmakers in the EU Parliament formally requested a moment of silence in Kirk's honor.
And that request was denied, right?
It was denied, which sparked absolute outrage among the right-leaning European factions.
I read that they immediately drew comparisons.
They did. They pointed out that the Parliament had previously held tributes for figures like George Floyd, arguing that the denial was evidence of institutional bias.
Okay, I have to stop you here and push back.
Go for it.
Because if you're listening to this and wondering why the Prime Minister of Italy or the European Parliament cares so deeply about a guy whose primary claim to fame was setting up folding tables at American state universities, you aren't alone.
It is a very valid question.
I had the exact same thought. Why does European leadership care about an American podcaster?
It's the perfect question. And the answer is that they don't necessarily care about the specific dynamics of an Arizona college campus.
Then what do they care about?
They care because Charlie Kirk had become a proxy
A proxy for what?
for a massive globalized ideological Cold War. You have to look at the domestic situations of leaders like Meloni, Orban, or Bardella.
Okay, what are they dealing with at home?
They are all currently fighting their own fierce internal battles against progressive politics, globalization, and shifting cultural norms in their respective countries.
Ah.
So when Kirk died in such a high-profile, tragic manner, he ceased being just an American organizer. He became an internationally recognized blank canvas.
He became a symbol of the silenced conservative.
Exactly. So when Viktor Orban talks about the progressive left being intolerant regarding Kirk's death,
Yeah.
he isn't really talking about American college students.
He's talking to his own voters in Budapest about his own political opponents.
Spot on. These international leaders projected their own domestic culture wars onto an American tragedy.
That makes total sense.
Kirk's death provided a highly visible emotional flashpoint to validate their own narratives that traditionalist conservative voices are under attack globally.
He becomes the ultimate rhetorical weapon for populist movements everywhere, and we see this in the sources radiating out across the globe. We have the Australian awakening.
Right, the text notes how Andrew Bogut, the NDA champion who is Australian, became a massive amplifier for the shock in his home country.
He started sharing posts highlighting how Kirk's death was stirring up national debates in Australia,
Debates about free speech, ideological suppression, and political violence.
which the source points out is wild because Australia is typically known for being much more neutral on these fiery cultural issues compared to the U.S.
Right, it really shows the reach of the event.
And it wasn't just Australia. We see right-leaning groups galvanizing in South America and in Israel.
The global resonance is undeniable.
There is a specific image in our source material that just gave me chills when I understood the scale of it. It's a simple text graphic that reads, in bold blue letters, South Africa in prayer for Charlie Kirk.
That single graphic is undeniable proof of the global reach.
It really is.
It demonstrates that the core messaging free markets, unapologetic traditional values, and fierce opposition to progressive orthodoxies resonated deeply with conservative factions thousands of miles away from any American campus.
But of course, the absolute epicenter of the morning was right here in the U.S.
Naturally.
The text details a massive vigil held at the Kennedy Center. Hundreds of people gathered. And this wasn't just grassroots college kids showing up with candles.
No, not at all.
The text explicitly notes that 85 sitting members of Congress were in attendance alongside high-ranking Trump administration officials.
The presence of 85 members of Congress instantly elevates the event. It transitions the morning from a grassroots tragedy into an official establishment-sanctioned event. It signals that the movement has fully merged with the institutional power of the political right.
Absolutely. And at that Kennedy Center vigil, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson made a statement that I think is the perfect bridge into understanding the actual beliefs inside this coloring book.
What did he say?
Speaker Johnson told the crowd that Charlie Kirk's work was about saving souls, not just shaping politics.
Saving souls. Wow.
Yeah.
When the Speaker of the House shifts the objective from passing legislation to securing eternal salvation, you are looking at a massive rhetorical and ideological shift.
It is a massive shift, and it forces us to unpack the actual ideological blueprint laid out in Faith and Freedom.
Because if you look at the source material, the absolute bedrock foundation of this entire political movement isn't tax policy or foreign relations.
It is theology. Faith is the engine.
The intersection of scripture and civic policy in this book is not subtle. It doesn't just suggest that faith informs politics.
No, it explicitly uses direct biblical verses as the ultimate, unarguable justification for modern political stances.
Let's look at the specific pages. There's an illustration of a young woman peacefully holding a Bible.
Right.
Right next to her is a drawing of a fetus developing inside a womb, radiating light.
And the text floating above it is Jeremiah 1.5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart.
Looking at this, it strikes me how effectively this bypasses the entire secular political debate.
Oh, completely. It doesn't engage with medical arguments about viability or legal arguments about bodily autonomy or Supreme Court precedents.
It just routes the entire pro-life argument straight to divine predestination.
That is the function of theological politics. It recategorizes the debate.
There's another powerful page showing a man looking distressed down on his knees with his hands clasped in prayer, and there are broken chains on the ground next to him.
And the text quotes Romans 3:23. I'm nothing without Jesus. I'm a sinner. I fall incredibly short of the glory of God.
This is immediately followed by an image of Jesus with open arms and Romans 6.9. Jesus defeated death so you can live.
Why are those specific verses so critical to a book about political freedom? Like, why the focus on sin and death? I want to spend a moment on that specific quote because it reveals the absolute core of the ideological blueprint.
The framing of that sentence is critical.
Let's break it down, because to me it reads as a very rigid, absolute barrier.
It is absolute, and it has to be. Think about how a secular democracy operates.
Okay.
In a secular framework, a debate over the definition of marriage is a debate between differing human opinions.
Right. It is about allocating civil rights, distributing legal benefits, and adjusting to evolving social norms.
In that secular arena, humans can negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
Compromise is the goal.
You pass a law, you tweak it, you find a middle ground.
But this quote fundamentally rejects the secular arena. By stating that God is the sole author and originator of the institution, it changes the nature of the debate entirely.
It is no longer a question of differing human opinions.
It becomes a binary choice between obedience to the Creator versus disobedience to the Creator.
And if the choice is between obeying God or compromising with man, there is no middle ground. You can't compromise with a sin.
Precisely. If a believer concedes on that political point, within this framework, they are committing a theological violation.
It locks the political stance into an unyielding cosmic imperative.
It freezes the ability to compromise, which is why the culture war feels so intractable.
That makes the political arena incredibly high stakes. Every vote is a test of internal loyalty.
It really does.
Which brings me to what I think is the most poignant quote in the entire source material, especially when you remember that the author was moved to create this book immediately after September 10th.
Ah, yes, the quote about death.
There is a drawing of a young man talking directly to Jesus at the gates of heaven. The quote from Kirk reads, "All death can do to a believer is deliver him to Jesus."
That is a staggering statement to read in the wake of a sudden, tragic death of a young leader.
It really is. When I read that quote, considering the timeline, I realized that it acts as a built-in theological shock absorber for the entire movement.
A shock absorber. Expand on that. How does that mechanism work in the minds of the followers?
Okay, imagine you are a 19-year-old college student. You idolize this leader. He's young, he's vibrant, he is leading the charge on your campus, and then suddenly, inexplicably, he dies.
Right.
Sociologically, an event like that can destroy a movement. It breeds despair. It creates massive cognitive dissonance. You start asking, if we are on God's side, why would God let our leader die?
It creates a crisis of faith.
Exactly. But then that grieving student opens this coloring book, and the leader himself has preemptively answered from beyond the grave, all death can do to a believer is deliver him to Jesus.
It completely neutralizes the sting of the event.
It defangs the tragedy entirely. It takes what looks to the outside world like a brutal earthly defeat, the sudden passing of a visionary, and instantly reframes it as the ultimate spiritual victory.
The absolute worst thing that can happen to a human being, death, is reframed as a promotion.
Yes. It allows the movement to process their grief while remaining deeply triumphant.
That is a brilliant observation. The theology protects the psychology of the movement. It ensures that the momentum isn't lost to despair.
So if faith and biblical authority form the unbreakable foundation, what is the earthly house they are building on top of it?
From this theological bedrock, the book transitions to its earthly political philosophy.
And looking through the illustrations, that philosophy focuses obsessively on individual liberty, the dangers of the state, and the preservation of traditional social structures.
Let's look at how the book defines the core difference between conservatism and liberalism.
There is a coloring cage divided in half. On one side, you have a drawing of the massive U.S. Capitol building labeled The Power of Government.
And on the other side, you have a group of diverse, smiling citizens labeled The Power of the Individual.
The quote across the top reads, "Liberals believe in the power of government, conservatives believe in the power of the individual."
It is a classic binary, cleanly distilled for the youth demographic. It establishes an immediate us versus them based on locus of control.
And it hammers that theme home. Another page shows a man looking up anxiously at a giant, imposing government building that is casting a long, dark shadow entirely over him.
The quote says, "The bigger the government, the smaller the citizen."
But the page that really stopped me in my tracks shows a sad-looking man in handcuffs. Next to him are simple blogs representing a house, a car, and a stack of money.
And the quote above him reads, "If you take away what a person owns, you control what that person can do."
Now, when I read that, my mind immediately jumped back to college philosophy classes. That is John Locke, isn't it?
It is absolutely John Locke.
Hmm.
What you are looking at is 17th century classical liberal economic theory copy-pasted and distilled into a modern coloring book.
I find that so fascinating. Explain how Locke's theories connect to a guy in handcuffs on a coloring page.
Well, Locke argued that your autonomy as a human being, your physical freedom, is inextricably tied to your ability to own property, which he viewed as the fruits of your own labor.
Okay, so property equals freedom.
In this ideological framework, a house, a car, or a bank account aren't just material goods or signs of wealth. They are the physical manifestations of your liberty.
Your labor created them, therefore they are extensions of yourself.
Exactly. So if you follow that logic, any government action that forcibly takes those things away, whether through high taxation, heavy regulation, or wealth redistribution, is not just an economic policy disagreement.
It is perceived as a direct physical assault on your personal freedom.
It puts you in handcuffs, exactly
Yeah.
as the illustration suggests.
That makes the smaller the citizen, quote, so much heavier. It frames any expansion of state power, no matter how well-intentioned, as a direct existential threat to the individual's ability to exist freely.
It does.
But here is where I hit a wall, and I really need you to help me reconcile this.
All right, what's the wall?
We have just established that the supreme pillar of this movement's earthly philosophy is the power of the individual.
Right.
There is literally a coloring page of a young man holding his fist up by an American flag with the quote, "The American dream is alive. If you work hard, stay disciplined, and never give up, you can achieve anything."
Right. A pure, unadulterated message of meritocracy and limitless individual potential.
You can achieve anything. That's the promise. But then you turn the page.
And what's on the next page?
Suddenly, we have an image of a woman peacefully holding a sleeping baby with a glowing cross in the background. And the quote from Kirk reads, "Ladies, listen carefully. There is no amount of corporate success that will ever come close to the fulfillment that comes from being a wife and a mother. That is the highest calling."
The juxtaposition is very jarring to a modern reader.
To me, it feels like a massive, glaring contradiction.
I can see why.
How do you reconcile a movement that preaches radical individual freedom, telling young people you can be anything, the government can't stop you, while simultaneously looking at half the population and prescribing a highly specific traditional domestic role as their absolute highest calling?
Listen carefully, ladies, it says.
Yeah, that feels incredibly prescriptive for a movement based on unleashing the individual.
I see exactly why that feels contradictory. If you approach it from a modern secular mindset, freedom is defined primarily as the maximization of individual choices and the tearing down of traditional societal barriers.
Right. In that secular view, telling a woman her highest calling is motherhood sounds like a restriction of her freedom.
Exactly. But to understand how this works within the text, you have to understand the conservative theological paradox. Their definition of true freedom is completely different.
Okay, let's explore that. How do they define freedom if it isn't just maximizing your choices?
We have to tie it directly back to the theological bedrock we discussed earlier. In this worldview, the universe is not random. It has a very specific, divinely ordained design.
God created human beings with specific biological natures and specific spiritual roles.
Therefore, true freedom in this ideology isn't found in rebelling against your biological or theological design. True freedom is found in discovering the role that the Creator specifically designed for you and fulfilling it perfectly.
Okay, wait, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm grasping this. It sounds like the difference between how you view a train.
A train. Okay, I'm listening.
A secular modern view of freedom might say that a train is only truly free if it can drive off the tracks, go into the woods, cross a beach, and go wherever it wants.
It has maximum choices.
Right. But the theological view says, no, a train is designed for tracks. If it goes off the tracks, it gets stuck in the mud and breaks down. It is miserable.
That's a great point.
The train is only truly free to reach its maximum speed and potential when it stays on the exact tracks it was engineered to run on.
That is a brilliant analogy. That perfectly captures the internal logic. Rebellion against the divine design leads to misery. Submission to the design leads to ultimate fulfillment.
So, when the quote tells young women that being a wife and mother is the highest calling, it is not viewed internally as chaining them to the stove.
No, not at all. Corporate success is seen as a fleeting human invention. Motherhood is a divine, eternal institution.
Within the logic of the coloring book, encouraging a woman to embrace motherhood is the ultimate act of empowering her to achieve her highest possible spiritual and earthly purpose.
She is hitting maximum speed on the tracks she was designed for.
Wow. Okay, that completely reframes the paradox. The freedom to achieve anything still operates entirely within the boundaries of the divine blueprint.
It makes the internal logic hold together flawlessly, even if it violently clashes with external secular definitions of feminism.
So we've covered the messenger, the tactile medium, the explosive catalyst of September 10th, the global shockwaves, and the foundational pillars of faith, property, and traditionalism.
I've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Because having a comprehensive ideology is one thing, but how did Turning Point USA actually spread these dense ideas so effectively to millions of teenagers?
The execution of the strategy.
Exactly. The coloring book dedicates several pages to illustrating Kirk's signature rhetorical strategy, and it is a masterclass in confrontation disguised as education.
The visual language used in these sections is incredibly specific. It depicts a methodology that is combative, highly visible, and tailored specifically for the social media age.
Let's look at the images. There are two very famous scenes replicated as coloring pages. One is a drawing of Kirk sitting casually behind a folding table on a campus quad.
He is holding up a sign that says, "Change my mind." The caption notes this was his famous tagline for campus debate challenges.
The very next page is a similar setup, with him holding a sign that says, "Prove me wrong." The text calls this his signature phrase at TPUSA events.
Those two phrases, "change my mind" and "prove me wrong," are among the most effective rhetorical devices developed in modern political organizing.
They really are. When I look at these illustrations of him sitting at the table with the sign, I don't see a political organizer. I see a gladiator in a modern-day philosophical coliseum.
That's a great way to describe it.
The folding table is the arena. The printed sign is his shield. He is purposely walking into hostile territory, a deeply progressive college campus, setting up his arena, and daring anyone to step into the ring with him.
And the feeling I get from these pages is that the spectacle of the debate, the crowd gathering, the cell phones recording, the tension of the confrontation, is just as important as the actual arguments being made.
You are absolutely right to highlight the spectacle. The spectacle is the point. Let's dissect why this specific tactical approach is so magnetic for youth recruitment, far more so than, say, handing out a policy pamphlet.
Yeah, why does sitting at a table work so well?
First, it projects absolute, unshakable confidence. He isn't standing on the edge of campus asking for permission to speak. He is planting a flag in the center of the quad and claiming the intellectual high ground.
Second, it flips the traditional power dynamic of political persuasion. He isn't standing on a soapbox shouting at students as they walk by. He is sitting down, remaining physically relaxed, and inviting them to come to him. He makes the opponent do the emotional and physical work of initiating the confrontation.
And when the opponent gets emotional, he just sits there looking calm, which plays perfectly on video.
Yeah, exactly. But most importantly, this tactic perfectly brands the conservative student as the bold underdog.
Think about the environment of a modern university. The prevailing institutional culture is heavily progressive.
By setting up that table, Kirk frames conservatism not as the stodgy, boring ideology of their parents or the establishment, but as a dangerous punk rock counterculture.
Oh, that is so true. For an 18-year-old, rebellion is inherently attractive. If the university administration is telling you what you can and can't say, the guy defying them looks like a rebel.
Precisely. It allows young conservatives to view themselves as the brave resistance fighting against a monolithic, oppressive institution.
Which flows perfectly into how the book frames the concept of education itself. There's a coloring page showing a young man looking thoughtfully at a compass.
The compass has the word "how" pointing north and "what" pointing south.
The quote from Kirk says, "Education should focus on teaching students how to think, not what to think."
There's another image of a student looking dejected, holding two thick books labeled PROS and CONS, with the quote, Many textbooks fail to present students with both sides of an issue.
These quotes are deployed to position the movement as the true champions of critical thinking and open inquiry. They are accusing the educational system of indoctrination.
I see that, but I have to pause here.
What's that?
Because looking at the source material as a whole, there is a massive, fascinating tension at play.
Attention. What do you mean?
The rhetoric we just looked at vehemently advocates for teaching how to think. It begs for students to weigh pros and cons, to engage in open debate, to change my mind.
Right.
Yet the coloring book itself, the physical artifact we are studying, is a highly prescriptive text delivering absolute, unquestionable truths.
Oh, I didn't even put that together.
That is the central tension of the entire movement's public posture.
I mean, earlier in the book, we literally have a page with a drawing of Kirk wagging his finger at a student with a speech bubble that aggressively asks, "What is a woman?"
We have text graphics that just flatly state, Jesus is Lord.
We have the quote that man has no authority to redefine merit.
Those aren't invitations to debate. Jesus is Lord is not a prompt for weighing pros and cons.
Those are declarations of exactly what to think. It is presenting an absolute moral, biological, and theological binary.
So how does this movement balance the change my mind, open inquiry debate bro persona with the Jesus is Lord, no debate allowed theological absolutes?
Yeah, how do they square that circle?
It is a delicate tightrope, but it functions beautifully as a two-step radicalization and recruitment process.
Okay, lay out the 2 steps for me.
The how to think and present both sides rhetoric is not the destination. It is the battering ram.
The battering ram.
When a university institution says, this is the settled science on gender, or this is the accepted systemic history of America, the conservative movement uses the language of critical thinking and open debate to crack open that consensus.
They use the opponent's own classical liberal values against them to introduce doubt.
So the debate challenge is just the tool to break down the wall of the progressive institution.
Exactly. It gets the student to question the authority of their professors. But once that wall is broken and the student crosses the threshold into the conservative movement, the foundation they are offered is not endless philosophical relativism.
Once they are inside, the foundation is the absolute theological and constitutional certainty we discussed in the first half of the book.
The debate table gets you in the door, but the Bible verses tell you what you are actually going to believe once you sit down.
That is a very accurate way to put it. The movement justifies this internal shift by arguing that they aren't indoctrinating. They believe they are simply defending self-evident objective realities against a culture that they believe has completely abandoned sanity.
Which leads us perfectly to the final quote from the rhetoric section.
What is the final image?
There is an image of a young woman looking down at her smartphone. She is visibly crying.
Surrounding her in the background are shadowed, angry figures pointing aggressively at her.
The quote from Kirk reads, "One of the most horrifying evolutions we've witnessed is the rapid movement away from tolerating opposing ideas to deploying obscene bully tactics."
That image completes the rhetorical framing of the movement. It transitions the conservative student from being just a rebel to being a persecuted victim.
It casts the person sitting at their kitchen table, coloring in this book, as the victim of societal bullying simply for holding traditional views.
It solidifies that underdog identity. And we know from looking at any sociological group, there's nothing more unifying than a shared sense of persecution.
Yeah. Okay. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's step back and look at the whole picture.
It's a lot to process.
We started with the simplest of objects, a nostalgic, tactile coloring book. But as we analyzed its pages, we saw how Dr. Antonio Arnold, armed with the dual authority of a veteran and a pastor, used this interactive medium to bypass our cynical filters and transmit complex, combative ideologies to a new generation through kinetic learning.
We examined the explosive catalyst, the sudden tragic death of Charlie Kirk on September 10th.
We saw how that event acted as a massive sociological accelerant, immediately turning a flawed living organizer into a pure, unassailable symbol, sparking 37,000 new chapter inquiries overnight.
We tracked the global shockwave, watching as international leaders from Italy to Hungary to Australia used an American podcaster's death as a proxy canvas for their own domestic culture wars over free speech and traditionalism.
And we broke down the core pillars of the ideology encoded in the art, the uncompromising bedrock of faith and biblical authority acting as a shock absorber for grief. the classical liberal view tying private property to physical freedom, the defense of divinely ordained gender roles as true liberty, and the combative, gladiatorial, rhetorical strategy designed to recruit disenfranchised youth.
It truly is a masterclass in how a political movement memorializes its past, processes its grief, and attempts to aggressively secure its future.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to circle back to what I promised at the beginning. We spent the last hour deep in the weeds of these highly charged political and theological arguments.
Right.
If you're listening, remember that exploring these sources deeply is about understanding the mechanics of the world and the information shaping it. Our goal was simply to hold this cultural artifact up to the light, take it apart, and see how the gears turn neutrally and objectively.
It is always a pleasure unpacking these complex topics with you.
It was a fascinating journey. We really got to see how belief, tragedy, and interactive media intertwine.
Absolutely.
Thank you to everyone listening for taking this journey with us today.